On today's show, where do the Houston Rockets stand in the Kevin Durant trade saga, and is now the wrong time to try to move on from Jalen Green? It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcast or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On NBA for $20 off your first purchase. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. And joining us now is your weekly co-host, the podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor and host of the Logger Line podcast, Ben DuBose. You can track down on Blue Sky at Ben DuBose. Happy early birthday, Ben. We're a couple of Gemini boys here. Got your birthday. Actually, if you're listening to this podcast, it's probably Ben's birthday already. And then I got mine in a few days. So happy early birthday, man. How are you doing, and how are you feeling about this whole KD situation?
Doing well, and I'm counting on Rafael Stone to get me Kevin Durant, a future Hall of Famer, for my birthday. Is that too much to ask?
Honestly, no, low bar. Like that's a pretty easily obtainable birthday present, given the state of current affairs between the Rockets and Suns and all the rumors and reporting surrounding these two teams. So let's start right there. We're going to get into a little bit of some of the specifics. In our last episode, we kind of presented the most likely trade package scenarios for the Rockets as it pertains to what it would take for them to accomplish a KD trade. And we're going to dig into those scenarios a little bit further in today's episode. Which trade package would we ideally prefer the Rockets send out for KD? But let's start with just kind of your general overview of this, KD trade saga, Ben.
Yeah, I think the Rockets are in a good spot. I think it's pretty clear based on the leaks in recent days that Phoenix is trying to drum up a bidding war that to this point doesn't exist. I'm so tired of the storyline of, Phoenix doesn't have to abide by his list. No one is saying, and I can't believe this is still a storyline after, decades of leveraged NBA trades. No one is saying that because Kevin Durant presented the Suns a list of Houston, Miami, and San Antonio, that the Suns are going to say, oh, that's sweet, and trade him to one of those three teams just because Kevin asked. That is not how it works. The Suns do not necessarily want to abide by that list. The problem is they may have to, because especially with 1 year left on his contract, that's going to discourage offers from other teams around the league who could lose him in a year with no compensation. Even a fit that could be as clean as the Minnesota Timberwolves, they're going to be reluctant to throw in a very recent Defensive Player of the Year as a centerpiece of that offer in Rudy Gobert if they think KD could leave them in a year and walk, and if that's what he's telling them would be his plan to do. And I'm tired of folks not understanding how the list works. I'm tired of folks acting like that perhaps KD should feel sorry for the Suns and do them a favor and expand his list. No, what the Suns should have done is trade him at the trade deadline. They should have worked with him to get a destination that he'd be on board with. They tried to send him to Golden State, and he wasn't on board with that, so it got nixed. He was not involved in the process, because if you wait until a year prior to free agency, that makes it all the more likely that the star is going to get sent to someone on his list, because no one's going to want just 1 year of the player, and then potentially he could walk for no compensation. You can't even trade the guy if it looks like that it's not going to be salvageable long term. So no, we shouldn't feel sorry for the Suns, because they had every opportunity to trade him at the trade deadline. Their season was already off the rails. They chose not to. So I think that list is pretty strong. Now, I don't feel super strong that the Rockets are going to get him, because while I don't think the Rockets' offer is clearly worse than the other teams on the list, I don't think it's necessarily all that much better either, especially compared to Miami, which may have a greater incentive to be desperate. The Rockets 52-30, a lot of young players. There's a better case for the Rockets to stay the course than there is for Pat Riley and the Miami Heat. They might be incentivized to push their chips in a little bit more. So while I'm not saying that the Rockets are necessarily going to land KD, I do think that the list factor is pretty strong at this point in time, unless Minnesota or some other team can get KD, convince him to expand his list. And amongst the offers that we've seen and the leaks that are coming out of Phoenix, I think an offer from the Rockets that involves, either Jalen Green and pick 10 or Dillon Brooks, Jabari Smith and pick 10 is at least competitive. I do worry a little bit that if the Rockets aren't including those future Phoenix picks and the offers are close, there could be some hard feelings on the Phoenix side to where their ownership is thinking, hey, Houston's not playing ball. If the offers are close, let's send them to the East. Let's send them some team and middle finger Houston, just because if we're not going to get a lot, let's take the poo-poo platter that's not from Rafael Stone and Tillman Fertitta. I worry about that a little bit. So no, I'm not counting my chickens before they hatch, but I think the Rockets are in a relatively good position right now when you look at their level of interest and you look at the reports out of Phoenix, which to me, Jackson, feel like an organization that's getting increasingly desperate.
Oh, absolutely. And all signs are pointing towards the fact that I feel like we're going to have a resolution with this Kevin Durant trade saga before the NBA draft. All signs are kind of pointing towards that direction, that the Suns want to have some type of conclusion to this saga before draft night hits, because that way, if they are able to walk away with some draft capital, in this year's draft, they're able to actually make the selections themselves, as opposed to having to, just settle for whatever picks another team made, because, if it takes after the draft, it's just kind of a messy situation.
The other thing that's really telling on this that I would jump in real quick, the fact that the Suns have still not leaked any possibility of them keeping KD, to me, that's telling that even with all these reports that they don't like the offers and clearly they're trying to get a bidding war started, they still have not even leaked the possibility of, we could theoretically run it back next year and bring KD to training camp. The fact that they're not even leaking that as a possibility, or at least not yet, should tell you how pot committed they are to making a Kevin Durant deal. And if a deal happens soon, if it happens before the draft for the reasons you laid out, the Rockets should be in at least a decent position.
And I think I love that you highlighted this, because I think it is really so important that people aren't realizing just how important KD's voice is in this, with that short list of potential teams, because as it stands, the Suns are sitting there on pins and needles, hoping that he expands his preferred list to include the Timberwolves, because at least at this point, the Timberwolves offer of Rudy Gobert and Dante DiVincenzo, which is kind of the reported offer, that they've put out on the table, at least that keeps the Suns at least pseudo competitive in the here and now. But KD has a lot of power in this situation, more so than I think people really realize. And I do wonder just how important his voice is going to be in ultimately deciding, there's this short list, and it's Spurs, Rockets are kind of leading the pack. Miami's in the mix there as well. But there's so many of these factors at play, right? What offers are being compared to one another, Houston's offer to the San Antonio offer, to Miami's offer. But I think the biggest potential element here is KD, where if he really looks at, if the Suns are trying to squeeze more out of San Antonio, and this is the big one, is, KD doesn't want to get sent to a team that has to gut the roster to be able to add him. And that's the big element that I think people are forgetting. And at least as far as the Rockets are concerned, right? That's why it feels like Rafael Stone's playing this incredibly smart, not willing to put up more than the absolute bare minimum at this point, because it kind of feels like KD is pushing his way towards at least one of Houston or one of these other two teams. But, gun to my head, I got to say that KD would probably want to be in Houston the most of any of these teams, because it gives him, I think, the best chance at winning a title.
I would think so. And another thing that I think people are conveniently forgetting about the non-list comparisons that get thrown out there, most notably Kawhi Leonard in 2018 from San Antonio to Toronto. The Raptors in 2018 were low-key loaded, Jackson. Go back and look at that eventual championship Raptors team aside from Kawhi. You had Pascal Siakam, you had OG Anunoby, you had Serge Ibaka and Danny Green still close to their primes. You had Fred VanVleet coming onto the scene. I believe they traded for Marc Gasol that season. That was a loaded roster. Norman Powell was in the mix. There's guys I'm forgetting. And the previous season, they were 59-23, number one in the East. So you were taking a 59-23 team, number one in the East, and basically running it back, but with Kawhi Leonard in place of DeMar DeRozan. That was a ready-made contender. And so it made sense for them to push their chips to the table, because they knew, especially in a market like Toronto, you have limited opportunities to win it all. It made sense for Toronto to take that risk because they were so close to the title. Who of these non-list suitors, like Toronto this year, for example, they are nowhere near as strong, not even close in 2025 to Toronto in 2018. Even the Minnesota Timberwolves. Jackson, the Minnesota Timberwolves won 49 games this year. Are you really telling me that a 49-win Minnesota team, if you hypothetically swap out Rudy and Dante for KD, is going to go to the top tier of title contenders next year? I'm not. And so that is what makes it a little less likely, assuming KD holds strong. Now, that's going to be the test because, the longer this drags out and maybe the Suns start leaking, hey, we don't have to trade you at all. Maybe KD backs off a little bit. Maybe Anthony Edwards places a call, although I heard from Mark Spears today that apparently he's not planning to. So hopefully that all holds. But if KD stays strong with the list, the other reason why I feel it's, pretty advantageous to the Rockets, I don't see a team amongst these non-list suitors that is anywhere close to the Raptors in 2018. That's what all the Phoenix media throws out as the hypothetical of, it doesn't have to be a team on the list because look at the Raptors winning a title in 2019 with Kawhi on this same one-year scenario. I don't see a team that's anywhere close to the 2018 Raptors that's in position to make a deal here.
Coming up, we'll dive into the possible trade options for the Houston Rockets. Which trade package makes the most sense for the Rockets to utilize to try and grab Kevin Durant? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Look, the NFL schedule release just dropped, and you better believe I'm already looking at my fall calendar and picking which games to hit. I got to go catch the Texans and CJ Stroud in person this season. And Game Time makes scoring NFL tickets just so simple, so easy. You'll find great seats for as low as $100 thanks to exclusive discounts. And with Game Time Guarantee, your tickets are 100% authentic, will arrive on time, and you'll always get the best price possible with fees included. So you know exactly what you're going to pay. They're fully transparent. They don't price gouge you. No hidden fees along the way. It's awesome. If you've never used Game Time to grab NFL seats, now's the time. It's seriously a game day upgrade. Take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Ben, I know that, in our recent episode here on Locked On Rockets, I kind of broke down the different kind of permutations that would be available to the Rockets to try and trade for Kevin Durant, given the salary constraints, right? And having to match the salary, which is kind of the biggest barrier to any potential KD acquisition for the Rockets. And I know that you did a similar breakdown over at Rockets Wire. So there's a few different pathways, a few different options here for the Rockets to go. Although it kind of seems like what it really boils down to is, one of two main assets going back to Phoenix, and that being one of, Jalen Green being kind of package one, with package two being one, Dillon Brooks, and then one of Jabari Smith Jr. and to a much lesser degree, Reed Shepherd, although we know that internally the organization's very high on Reed Shepherd, and, they haven't really gotten any much of a glimpse at him yet. I feel pretty strongly in saying that I doubt that they would include him as like the extra piece, the salary matching component, what have you. Even as like the upside prospect component for Phoenix to look at in a trade, simply because the Rockets really like Reed and they want to give him a chance to see if he can be the guy that they think he can be after selecting him number 3 overall. Now, that's not to say that they wouldn't completely wouldn't put him in a trade, but I just find it increasingly unlikely. So the two kind of options here, right, are a Jalen Green led trade package, which it could be, right, Jalen plus some salary filler. It wouldn't necessarily have to be Dillon Brooks, but you could also factor in Jalen and Dillon Brooks as that first trade. And then the secondary one, right, Dillon Brooks, Jabari Smith Jr., and salary filler in order to get KD. And then that's where you start looking at maybe sprinkling in, having to include that number 10 overall pick, or maybe Cam Whitmore as a bit of a sweetener on a deal in order to beat out, one or two of these other offers. At this current stage, which way would you lean? If forgetting about the draft capital and the extra potential components adding in there, just looking at the bare bones framework of those two deals, if it's like the Jalen package or the Jabari package, which way are you leaning right now?
Yeah, so first off, to close the loop on our initial segment, I was listing out all those great 2018 Raptors. I actually forgot about Rockets legend Kyle Lowry, who was a borderline all-star at that time.
There you go, yeah.
So shout out to Cal. Point is, the Raptors were a loaded team back then. I don't see a rival on the KD market now that's anywhere close to that. Now, as far as the packages, yeah, I think those honestly are what's being discussed right now amongst the Phoenix Suns and to a lesser extent the Rockets, although according to Kelly Eco, it seems that Houston's offer is firm. We just don't know specifically what that is. Yeah, I'm assuming Amin Thompson and Alperen Sengun are totally off the table for a 36-year-old, soon to be 37 KD. And I've been told pretty strongly that Fred VanVleet would not be a part of these discussions simply because if the Rockets don't have Fred, they don't think they are good enough for a win-now move to be worth it. So with Fred, it could work financially. It's just, as the Rockets see it, you could make a value case to move Fred for KD. They're certainly not saying that they think that Fred is better than KD. What they're saying is that if you add KD but you subtract Fred, they don't think they're good enough to be in that, at least quasi-contender range next year. And if they aren't, then it defeats the purpose to make a trade for a guy who's going to be 37 years old when the season starts in the fall. I've gone back and forth. And you can make arguments both ways. So my main criteria, I would like it to be just one inner young tier guy or inner young core guy, that's not a Men or Sengun, obviously. So I would prefer it not to be two guys of your young core because the Rockets do have a luxury with how deep they are with young prospects that even if KD doesn't fully work out and you lose one of these young guys, well, look, it would sting to lose a Jalen Green, but you have other wings or guards like Reed Shepherd, like Cam Whitmore, who might flourish given a bigger role. Similarly, you lose Jabari, well, you can scale up Tari Eason's minutes. You can play Cam Whitmore at forward. Maybe you keep pick 10. That's the one scenario. I don't think I would do it, but if you could keep pick 10 and you trade both Jaylen and Jabari, and then you basically draft your Jabari replacement at 10, reset the contract clock too, going back 3 years, and you bring in a forward. There should be several guys available at 10 who theoretically could replace Jabari in your longer-term blueprint.
Carter Bryant.
Yep, that's one. I don't know that I would do
Coward.
that. Shoot it, Coward.
There you go. I was about to say the line, Ben.
I don't think I would do it. That's the one scenario where I'd think of giving up two of the the inner young core guys, the inner tier, let's say. But generally, I would prefer to give up one because I think the Rockets with this core 7 have enough luxury that if you lose one of those young guys, and even if the KD trade ultimately goes bust or somewhat goes bust, which is a risk at his age and with his mileage, then I think they have enough insulation, they have enough depth, and they have enough future picks that you can overcome it, assuming the player you lose is not Amin Thompson or Alperen Sengun, who I think are largely irreplaceable because they've shown you so much already. I think I would be in the minority, but Jackson, even if it cost you Dillon Brooks, which it would from a salary perspective to make the math work, I think I would lose Jabari before I would lose Jaylen, simply because even though I wouldn't consider it likely, I see a greater path to Jaylen becoming a star, to Jaylen having a higher ceiling than Jabari does. And if there's one thing the Rockets have shown us, it's that they can fill out their rotation with quality depth up and down the roster. So if we're talking about replacing a Dillon Brooks or replacing a Jabari Smith Jr., I trust Rafael Stone to get creative. Look at how he brought in Steven Adams, just 2 second-round picks, got him when he was hurt, and now he's a mainstay for the foreseeable future. I trust their ability to find the depth pieces, especially with how many picks they have moving forward. It's the high-end talent that's the hard part of this equation. And even if Jaylen underwhelmed in the playoffs, I do still think the high-end talent with Jaylen is greater than it is with Jabari. So for the same reasons you would bring in KD, because you're getting, potentially an A1, at least a short-term A1, it's harder to get the high-level talent, the elite talent. I would err on the side of keeping Jaylen, even if it costs you Dillon and Jabari. I just think it's easier to replace guys like Dillon and Jabari. Not saying that, you wouldn't feel their absence. You would. It's just I trust Rafael Stone when it comes to filling out, let's say, spots 5 through 12 on a contending roster. It's filling out 1 through 4, those true top-of-the-line guys. That's where it gets more difficult. And so, gun to my head, if I had to pick between Jaylen and Jabari, I would lean Jaylen, and that's not necessarily me saying that Jaylen's a clearly superior player. It's me saying that I think there's more upside potential with Jaylen. He might not hit it, but the fact that that ceiling is there makes me a little more reluctant to include him.
There's a couple of interesting wrinkles there. First off, I think we've used the analogy gun to my head 3 times so far in this podcast. Geez. We should stop doing that. I did it because you did it, and then you did it again. So we need to stop. Sorry. This is getting repetitive. No, but as is all this KD discussion. With that, I want to say, first off, I think the angle of factoring in Jabari's impending contract extension is one to absolutely consider, because look, even if the Rockets decide to kick the can down the road and say, you know what, we're comfortable letting you and Tari potentially just hit restricted free agency next summer, there's going to be a team out there that probably rolls along and wants to offer Jabari 20, maybe 25 million a year. And then at that point, if you're the Rockets, do you really feel comfortable matching Jabari at 20 or 25 million a year when you know that you're going to have to pay, like you're already paying Sengun, you know, you're going to have to pay a Thompson, a rookie scale max down the line. You know that at least all signs are pointing towards the fact that they're probably going to renegotiate, at least hopefully a team friendly deal with Fred VanVleet, but you're going to be paying Fred, right, to still run the ship for the next few years, more than likely. At some point, the tax implications are going to become very, very real for this team, especially when you start to factor in if they were to make a move for KD and then plan on inking him to that 2-year, $120 million extension, which is kind of the expectation for any team that's on his short list of preferred destinations. That extension will be signed the moment he lands with whatever team that he's planning to stay with for the foreseeable future. So there's a lot of salary implications that could be factored into the idea of maybe it makes a little bit more sense to move on from Jabari, like you said, and resetting the clock potentially with that 10th overall pick, which is why I'm actually coming into this. I thought I was going to be more in favor of the Jalen Green package, just Jaylen, Dillon, call it a day, or Jaylen and some filler, call it a day. Now I don't. So remind me really quickly, financially, does Jaylen and filler work, or does it have to be Jaylen and Dillon? I thought it had to be Jaylen and Dillon for it.
No, it doesn't. You can do Jaylen, Jock, Aaron. That might be enough, but
I don't think it is. I've run the numbers.
You're so close. You're so close, Jackson. You'd be like within 2 million. So you could wait until you could sign the draft pick and do the deal later in the offseason. You could sign agree in principle to the trade, and then sign the 10th overall pick, which the 10th overall pick is going to be making about $6 million. So even Nate Williams might be enough. Like the point is, Jaylen, Jock, and Holiday, or Dillon, Jabari, Jock, and Holiday would be so close that even if it doesn't get you over the threshold, you'd be so close. We're talking like $1 million or $2 million, that it would be very easy to overcome. So I think just for purposes of our discussion, it's easier to sort of break it down into Jaylen versus Dillon and Jabari.
Okay.
The other point that I wanted to raise real quick
can I just because I wanted to finish that off really quick. It's just, I like the idea of, if you have to get rid of Jabari, I like the idea of retaining that 10th overall pick to draft your kind of Jabari replacement. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the area where you start to get into like, okay, well, if Phoenix is demanding draft capital, I'd almost be more inclined to include that first, that 2027 first further down the line instead of the 10 right here, because that 10 right here could turn into a really good upside 3-and-D guy like Carter Bryant, like Cedric Coward right out of the gate, a guy that you can kind of groom into that role, especially in the version where if you're able to keep Dillon on top of that potentially, like, I don't know, that's a very interesting outcome to me.
And maybe you can get some very light protections if you give up the 27. Maybe you can get like top 4 protection, something like that, in case you get really, really lucky. That's something that Gerald Morey always tried to put whenever he could on his deals to protect the super high end outcomes. The other point that I would raise on the contracts. So beyond the extension uncertainty with Jabari, which is a very real factor, I also think you'd be selling low on Jaylen. Now, when I say I'm preferring to keep Jaylen, that's not me saying, oh, I'm all in on Jalen Green making the All-Star League thing.
Wait. I don't want you to jump the gun on this. This was going to be my final segment. I wanted to tee this up. I want you to be able to make the case for keeping Jaylen. Is what I want to do.
And I'll get to that in a minute. But one thing I'll say to close the contractual loop.
Okay.
If things don't go well next season with Jaylen, I don't think his market value would be any worse next offseason than it is now. And in fact, it actually might be better because his deal would be almost up. 1 year, and then I guess the player option, but the point is 2 years at the most. As opposed to now, there's sort of this cloud over him coming off the Warriors series, and the deal is just starting. So I sort of look at it both ways in that if he goes out and has a very good year next year, then obviously that's going to bolster his value. But then if he doesn't, at least the contract is closer to its expiration. And so I think at a bare minimum, it would be comparable value to now. In my opinion, selling Jalen Green right now at the start of this new contract and coming off the Warriors series, it sort of feels like selling low. So I just don't see a ton of risk, at least from an asset standpoint, in waiting. Now, you can certainly argue, and we'll do that in a few minutes in the third segment, you can certainly argue about the basketball merits of it. But in terms of the contract, the asset, I see only downside to forcing a Jalen Green trade now, and potentially a lot of upside if he goes out and plays better next year, or even if he doesn't, just simply the contract being closer to its expiration.
No, Ben, we're going to argue about the contract too, because now you got me all riled up here. All right, coming up, the case for keeping Jalen Green. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Lollipop. Look, Lollipop is a new kind of soda made for people who love the classic taste of soda, but want something that actually supports their health. With just 2 to 5 grams of sugar and 9 grams of prebiotic fiber in every can, Lollipop is reimagining soda in a way that's better for your gut. Traditional sodas are just jam-packed, loaded with sugar, like 39 grams in a regular Coke or 44 grams in an orange Fanta. Lollipop flips that script with just a fraction of the sugar, no artificial sweeteners, and gut-friendly ingredients like OlliSmart, a blend shown to support digestive and overall health. It's soda that tastes like the real thing, but actually does something good for your body. Look, I'm a total soda fiend. I have been for most of my life. Dr. Peppers, Cokes, all that stuff. I am so happy that I found Lollipop, and I've got the vintage cola flavor on me right now. This is easily my favorite one, although the crisp apple one is really, really good too. If I want like a change of pace, something that's not quite soda-y, but a little bit more on the lighter end of like the soda spectrum. And they're delicious. They taste like the real thing, and they're actually good for you, which is the absolute best part. So get a free can of Lollipop. Just buy any 2 cans in store, and they'll reimburse you for 1. Head to drinklollipop.com/LockedOnNBA to claim your free can and find Lollipop near you. Give them a chance. They really are delicious. They're good for you. They're great replacements for traditional soda. That's drinklollipop.com/LockedOnNBA. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Ben, we're going to get into the basketball side of things for a second, but I'm going to push back pretty hard on your point that you just made right now about selling low on Jalen Green right now, because here's my biggest worry. And this is the thing that I want every person who's like preaching and begging for continuity, keep the core, don't make any changes, run it back, all that stuff, right? We saw Jalen Green get flat out exposed against this Warriors defense. And you can have Ime, you can have Rafael. I was going to say Ime and Udoka, but whatever, 2 separate people, like Tony brothers, or Mike, Dan, and Tony. Anyways, so you can have them say, take it as a badge of respect, and they took Jalen out of the series, all this stuff. But the reality of the situation is, Jalen struggled against the Warriors flat out. He'll be one of the first guys to tell you that happened. The Warriors shut Jalen Green out of a series for basically 5 or 6 out of the 7 games. My biggest worry is that they roll through next season, still have a lot of regular season success, right? Still, similar team identity, offense is propped up on offensive rebounding, all that good stuff. They get to the playoffs again. And if Jalen Green lays another egg in the playoffs, if he struggles against another team in the postseason and the Rockets flame out in the first round, or maybe even make it past but if he does not have good postseason numbers for a second postseason trip in a row, at that point, the idea of like, oh, this Jalen might still have potential, or maybe a change of scenery will do him wonders, or maybe the Rockets just aren't utilizing him the right way. All of that goes out the window. And at that point, he is a 2 guard making $33 million a year for the next 2 years that has failed to perform in the playoffs in back-to-back postseasons. That is a lower low than what he's on right now. And so I argue that it is easier to trade him right now to a team that still might believe in his upside. Hell, even the Suns don't really want him, right? There's the report coming out of Phoenix that if they do get Jalen, they're looking at rerouting him to a third team. But
that's my point. I just don't think the value is there right now, coming off that playoff series and the contract being as many as 3 years. I think there is so much uncertainty right now that you're not going to get the value that you want from a Houston perspective. So I just personally don't see it getting that much worse. I could be wrong, but I just don't think the value is there right now.
I think the difference is you think that he has a chance to recoup some of his value and get back to a place where you could theoretically trade him for more value, whereas I think his value can go substantially lower than what it's at right now. But my worry in your scenario is also if Jaylen starts to improve his stock to where you would think, oh, you could get more value for him now. I would worry that the Rockets then would think, oh no, he's turned it around. Don't trade him, right? And then you talk yourself into keeping him, and then it becomes like a fool's gold situation again, where you're like, oh great, he's great again, or he looks awesome in the regular season, and then you make it to the playoffs, you skip next year's trade deadline, and you're disappointed again in the postseason. So that's where you and I think differ in how we kind of view the potential outcomes here for the Jalen Green situation, at least contractually, and kind of what the timeline will look like. But from a basketball perspective, Ben, hit me with your argument, because I've been one of Jalen Green's largest like detractors, right? Like I'm a little out on him at this point with the performance in the playoffs, the inconsistency. I understand, and I have acknowledged repeatedly the growth that he has shown as a defender, as a playmaker, that he has become more consistent, but there's a level of like his role on this Rockets team, regardless of what Rafael says about this team being a more team-oriented team. This team's identity needs him to be the lead guard, needs him to be the guy dropping 20 plus a night on decent efficiency for them to have a chance to win games. And it becomes even more apparent now that the big bucks are kicking in, right? The extensions for him and Alp are kicking in. The going's about to get tough. Like the money is there. Like it's time to put up or shut up. And I don't see it.
Okay. So let's start with the playoffs.
Sure.
It's certainly a data point that you keep in mind. There are certainly some guys that are playoff risers or the reverse. You know, Fred is a classic example. Fred VanVleet, of a guy who I think is clearly a playoff riser. And we saw that this year, but we already knew that from years and numerous series of that happening with the Toronto Raptors. We saw it in the 2019 NBA Finals. So one series, one matchup, there are plenty of guys, even playoff risers, that have had a bad series here or there, especially early in their careers. So you keep the data point in mind, and then if he stacks other bad playoff performances on top of it, to your point, Jackson, then at that point, you do have to consider does something about the playoffs expose the holes in Jalen Green's game more? That can become a storyline, but for now, when the sample is literally 7 games, I'm inclined to say it's too small to take anything from. It's annoying. You keep it in the back of your mind, but it is just 7 games. It is just one matchup. Now, as far as the regular season, so I think we can agree. Toss out the final 3 games because Rockets
I will say, just to dunk on the people who are like very clearly like just anti Jalen Green, completely, right? People who post like the screenshot of like the playoff stats and then like the final 3 regular season games. No, that's a disingenuous argument, because
he was out there getting cardio to keep the 82
literally he just going. Yes, exactly. That part's ridiculous. And I've debunked that. Like that's stupid.
Yeah. So take out the final 3 games. If we ignore those, pretend like they didn't exist. The final 60 games of his season, 60 games, he averaged just under 23 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists per game at 22, 23 years old, shot 44% overall, above 37% on threes, true shooting percentage a little above 56. Those aren't star numbers, but they aren't far away. Like if you bump that up even a little bit to say 24, 25 points per game on 58% true shooting, he's potentially an all-star next year. Now, I'm not saying I expect that to happen, but he's close enough. And that's a sample of 60 games, nearly the entire season after he got off to that bad start, in which he was playing at a very high level. So he's close enough. I'm not saying he's going to get there. The consistency issues are real, but he's close enough. And that's not, picking and choosing. That's the final 60 games, all of it. He's close enough to where I'm intrigued to play this out a little bit longer. Now, that's the upside view. The downside view, because of his archetype as a player, the bar is very high for him to be an efficient scorer, because if he's not, then he's just not providing enough value in other ways. Like the defense has gotten better, but he's not going to be, a dynamic defensive player. He's not going to be anywhere near a Thompson. So the defense has gotten passable, but I don't think anyone would look at Jalen Green and say, wow, that's a dynamic defender. The 3-point shooting has gotten better, but he's not a marksman by any means. He's not an elite playmaker. He's not a great foul drawer. So while he's close to where you can say, hey, you tick up, the efficiency metrics, the points just by a couple, and he's maybe an all-star. At the same time, he almost has to get there in order for him to be a good starter on a contender. Otherwise, he's just not providing you enough value in the other areas. And that's where that's where the six-man discussions come into play.
For sure. And this is where I think it gets lost in translation, is that, like, at no point, nobody making these good faith arguments, right? Nobody's saying that Jaylen is a bad player. I think that's the issue here. Is I think that he might just not be equipped for the role that he's ultimately going to have to be able to fill for this Rockets team. The archetype, right? He's going to have to hit a certain threshold of efficiency and points per game. And yes, he's close, but there are certain drawbacks, right? And you ran through the different, his different skill sets, right? He's not really elite at any one thing. He's an elite athlete, right? Who's very good at a few different categories, but hasn't really broken, right? Has struggled with the consistency, has struggled with his efficiency, isn't particularly elite at any one skill on the floor, outside of like his ability to, self-create at times, but that's entirely dependent on whether or not his shot's going in. And it's been wildly inconsistent, unfortunately. And we saw it become exposed in the playoffs against the Warriors, where it wasn't even a case of, oh, he's being constantly double teamed. It was he couldn't beat Steph Curry and Buddy Hield and Brandon Pajimski in isolation. Like, that should have been the bar, the bare minimum for a player of his archetype. Should be able to cook those three defenders pretty routinely in a playoff series in order to put some points on the board.
And the glass half full argument, the low hanging fruit is so low hanging. He has almost zero game that's not free throws or layups at this point. The midi game, he has almost deserted it altogether. The metrics are terrible. And I think more than anything, that's what happened against the Warriors. They made it tougher for him to get off the step back threes, and he wasn't quite as efficient at making them. And then Draymond Green is great at going vertical without fouling. Or I guess you can make the argument that he is fouling, but he's not, he's not getting called for it. But regardless, that tends to happen in the playoffs no matter what, and especially if it's Steve Kerr and the Warriors. So the low-hanging fruit for Jaylen, and in theory it's achievable, if he can add some sort of mid-range game or a floater game, I don't think it's that dissimilar to James Harden, who after his first couple of years in Houston, he needed that in-between game, and he came back that offseason and worked on the floater, and it transformed his game. Now, some people will hear that and say, well, wasn't Jaylen way better before that than Jaylen is now? Yeah, but that's because James had so many other parts of his skill set, the playmaking, the drawing fouls. Like, Jaylen is just not that type of player. So James was starting from a higher floor. But even for James to get to his level, he had to get some sort of in-between game to make defenders account for more real estate. And for him, that was the floater. Maybe it's that for Jaylen, maybe it's the midi. But what I saw against Golden State, Jackson, is that they just did not have to account for the in-between areas. They played him to step back from three, and they played him to drive to the rim. They did not account at all for the possibility of him pulling up from the mid-range areas, because they just knew that he wasn't very good at it and he wasn't going to trust it. So in theory, and this is not something that's going to be like a fish out of water for Jaylen. If you go back and look at his pre-draft profile, he was a guy who took a lot of middies when he was with the G League Ignite. It's something that in his first couple of years he did a bit of in Houston, and it's deserted him. I think some of this, the Rockets have asked him to work so hard at these other things. He has gotten better, certainly from three-point range. He's improved a lot as a shooter. I think he's gotten a little better at finishing through contact. He's worked on his strength. He's certainly gotten better defensively. He's worked so hard at these specific areas that I think these other things, they sort of been put on the back burner. The problem for Jaylen is that because of his archetype, he can't have any zeros because he's just not providing enough value in other areas. So for him to really hit, he can't have this clear deficiency. Yeah, he's got to be better, and he has gotten better as a three-point shooter, as a defender, but it can't be a trade-off of, oh, well, I forget how to shoot mid-range shots and I don't develop a floater because I'm working so hard at the other stuff. The challenge for Jaylen is, can he put all of it together? And that's what, going into year 5, that you really need to see from him. And so in theory, it's achievable, but we can't oversimplify it and say, well, all he's got to do is add a mid-range shot or add a floater. I mean, in theory, yes, But if he does that, then he can't, slip back a little bit from 3-point range. I mentioned that 60-game sample where he shot over 37% from three. What if that's not sustainable and he goes back to, the guy shooting 33 or 34% from three that he was before that? What if he's not as good at drawing fouls or, playmaking or defending? In theory, all he has to do is get a little bit better at the mid-range, get a little more efficient, and he can get to that next level. It is achievable. That's why I'm not out on him, but it's a very fine line to walk because with his archetype, he can't have any zeros. He's got to be very good across the board as a scorer. Otherwise, it's not going to hit at a high enough level for him to be, an upper echelon starter for a contending team. So that's the bottom line. It's achievable, but it's a very fine line for him to walk. It's achievable enough that I would play this out longer. I am intrigued. I see the high ceiling still there, but your concerns are valid as well. And that's sort of the delicate dance that I think the Rockets and Rafael Stone are going to find themselves in over the next 12 months.
We definitely want your thoughts on the KD trade saga. What would be the trade package you would want to give up for Kevin Durant? How do you feel about Jalen Green? Are you out on Jalen Green? Are you still bought in? Do you want to see him get another chance with the Rockets moving forward? Let us know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Ben, you know the drill. Let me know where to track you down at.
Yep, Ben DuBose on Blue Sky, the Logger Line, and the Rockets Wire on X. And one more Jalen Green plug for you. I threw out all those stats. He did have a positive plus minus in that 60-game sample as well. So even if the lineup data, to your question, is fair, it wasn't like he was actively harming the team either. They were better with him out there. So we can question how much, we can question how sustainable it is. But overall, aside from the playoffs, there were clear strides taken. And that's why I think there is a defensible case to still believe in him. But yeah, you're getting to a point where the time is running out. And Jackson, as always, thanks for having me.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thanks so much for checking out the show. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform if you're choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.